Morning everyone, my name is Elliott Young, I'm from EMC Consulting, and yes, we're going to talk about the ways you can negotiate and vary conditions on the contracts you have with suppliers in the cloud environment and how to get the right balance. So first of all, we started looking at people around the table to see what are they using in the way of cloud services right now. And a lot of the comments we got were around mainly public services like Office solutions, Outlook, property management solutions, the Azure platform. We also had some private uses where people were using rack space. So there's a mixture there of private and public cloud computing, but mainly public. So how did people vary their relationship with the suppliers? Well, first of all, they looked at the menu of services and they used that menu to pick and choose the things that are absolutely specific to them. So they made sure they didn't pay for things they didn't really need. Also had a look at some key drivers, and one of the main areas they looked at was the area of RPOs and RTOs. So I assume people are familiar with this, but this basically is a measure that says if there's some kind of problem, how long does a supplier have to get that data or that service back? And once you get it back, how much data can you afford to lose before you have to rekey it or before it affects your business? So this was the main focus. We then looked at the standard SLAs to say, are these appropriate for your business? Because if they are, then you can go ahead and use those. But if not, don't expect the supplier to come back and rewrite the SLAs for you. One of the people around our table actually went to a third party to help them create the changes that they needed for their SLA, and they thought it was worth doing that. The reason they thought it was worth doing that is because this overriding priority of risk. With each adoption of different cloud technology, it needs to be a risk assessment to make sure that you're using appropriate technology for your level of business that's actually in the cloud. Also went to look on factors such as availability and DR process. So not just the DR technology, but what actually happens in the event of a disaster. What are the arrangements for business continuity and disaster recovery? So having had a look at the SLA point of view, how does this approach to your suppliers actually map to your future cloud strategy? Well, one of the key areas that one of the people on our table had was the strategy to say that we will have no more data centers in our organization. That's our aiming point, that's where we want to get to. So with that in mind, let's evaluate all of the supplier offerings in terms of the goal of having no more data centers. So that's the IT strategy, but how does that also match to the business strategy? So it needs to be an evaluation of both of those aspects. This also gives you a chance to introduce more guiding principles. So instead of going to a supplier and saying, what software have you got that we can buy and install on our own kit, consider other options to start off with by saying to them, what do you have as a service? So I've just called this X as a service, but it can be anything as a service, and you can start out by asking the suppliers what they have first before you go and buy that software or that solution. We also found out that as you're evaluating these different offerings, you have to be really careful to make sure you're comparing apples with apples. And these are supposed to be pictures of apples down here. Even in a situation where you go out to tender, it may be that a number of people respond to that tender and their solution is not in fact the same scope. So you need to make sure it's absolutely critical that you are comparing like service offerings. We then went on to look at what can you do to mitigate against any potential problems in the future, and we looked at these main themes. So a couple of people on the table were using an escrow service, which means that you can still access data and to a certain extent services if a cloud service provider fails. And they thought it was worthwhile paying for that additional level of assurance. We looked at changing the approach to architecting the adoption of cloud. So how can you use more than one supplier to offset each other's risks? So say, for example, you've got a main service provider who's supplying your processing service. How can you, for example, replicate all of that data to a second cloud provider so that you can access that data in the event the first cloud goes down? we had an example of someone who was paying, I think it was a couple of £1,000s a month to have a completely separate, empty cloud sitting there waiting to be used in the event of some kind of disaster. So there are lots of opportunities there you can explore with the architecture. People also wanted to go back and ask suppliers, how do you do backups? What steps are you going to take to protect my data and my services? So you can ask them to actually demonstrate evidence of their backup procedures. Some people are inspecting contracts and use of Iron Mountain, for example. You can also ask the suppliers to carry out tests of their processes to make sure they're going to be appropriate for your needs. And in particular, carry out a technical proof of concept to make sure that in these failover scenarios, you're still going to be able to operate. The main thing about this area was don't assume that service providers have the highest level of availability and that if something goes wrong in their own environment, they're going to have the capability to fail over instantly. Even with the largest service providers, there's some element of risk in terms of failover and availability. So basically, in summary, we came up with the idea that as you go into the cloud, make sure you have your eyes wide open to know exactly what you're getting into from an SLA point of view. Test the contracts, make sure you do due diligence, the devil's in the detail, but above all, this is supposed to be a cloud solution, so don't overcomplicate it. Thanks.